here we are. An interesting situation we find ourselves in. Spider-Man 2018 was a hit, the sequel, inevitable, on the way. But what comes in between? Well, this is a question that many fans would have had after the release of Spider-Man 2018. But I guess not many of us would have considered a fully dedicated spin-off known as Miles Morales. But nevertheless, it was a welcome one, because Spider-Man Miles Morales is the perfect midway jump between Spider-Man 1 and 2. Yes, Insomniac, they are mad lads, they did it. Spider-Man Miles Morales is an interesting title when it comes to discussing the release cadence for Spider-Man games and this universe that they are creating. It provides a different perspective and a type of story that can be told from the lens of Spider-Man. As I stated when talking about Peter Parker, his journey feels a lot more established, where he has been Spider-Man for years now and he was a much more established Spider-Man, going through the more adult hurdles of the Spider-Man journey. So the Miles Morales story is a showcase of Spider-Man through school story and that juggling act that comes with discovering you are, in fact, a Spider-Man. And I think that the Miles Morales spin-off game really does tackle these concepts of heroism and the understanding of what it means to be a Spider-Man in that perspective that we're used to from things like the Sam Raimi films and those different origin stories of Spider-Man where it's, he got bit by the spider and he becomes Spider-Man, the high school student. But I think here with Miles Morales, it is also a visual showcase to showcase the fidelity of the PS5, and it really was a game that when it released, whilst it was a bit more bite-sized than Spider-Man 2018, really was a great showcase as to the character that we would get in the upcoming sequel that recently released, Spider-Man 2. The character Miles Morales has grown in popularity over recent years, especially with the critically acclaimed Spider-Verse films, which explore the DNA of what makes Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Miles Morales is an interesting character who retains much of the quirky characteristics like Peter, but is his own unique different take on Spider-Man. And here in his own game, it really is a great showcase to get you enthralled and invested in this character and looking at the superhero through a different lens and perspective. And if you're on board for that, then Spider-Man Miles Morales is the perfect midway jump between the numbered sequels, and I'm here to tell you why. So let's get into my video for Spider-Man Miles Morales and why it's so awesome. The story for Miles Morales, if you aren't familiar, takes place after the events of Marvel's Spider-Man, the 2018 release, and sees Miles assisting Peter in dealing with crime. And it's this role where Peter has kind of taken Miles under his wing and is teaching him how to be a Spider-Man. And Miles is assuming this role as a second Spider-Man. But Miles is put into a position where he will be the primary Spider-Man as Peter is going away on vacation with MJ, meaning that Miles will have to step up and protect the city as the main and one and only Spider-Man. As I mentioned earlier, the part that the Spider-Man journey is here being captured for Miles is him finding himself in this stage of discovery and understanding his values and the responsibility that comes with being a Spider-Man. Throughout the journey, Miles is confronted with tough choices, trying to manage and adapt to the role of balancing the lives and relationships that occupy the life of Miles that clash with the world of Spider-Man. Like I mentioned in my previous video when Brian Ederhart was talking about the story for Spider-Man, he said the best types of stories are the ones where Peter's world and Spider-Man's world clash. And you can see this type of formula here in full throttle with Miles, but it's more through the lens of a high school student than an adult scientist trying to find work. To me, I feel like the Miles Morales in many ways opts to tell a story which hits the core of the Spider-Man legacy and story, which is the iconic "with great power comes great responsibility" quote, which defines many of the choices that make Spider-Man Spider-Man and the tough decisions to choose the betterment of the people than your own desires. Throughout, Miles is at a crossroads between saving the ones he loves, himself, or putting the greater good above everything, and ultimately it culminates in a story that feels impactful and does a great job at setting the stage for Miles Morales as a character and him being a counterpart to Peter Parker's Spider-Man, which is a topic of discussion for the next video. Overall, Miles Morales is a bite-sized story that builds off many of the key events of Marvel's Spider-Man and sees Miles come into his own as the next main character, because spoiler alert for Spider-Man 2, the game has both Peter and Miles center stage as main characters, and the Miles Morales story is really him being set up to be a main character alongside Peter Parker, the iconic, the legend, the Spider-Man himself, and Miles really is fleshed out here as a character, and you can see his friends, his goals and his objectives, and his origin story pretty much come full force here. And this is why I say that this game is in many ways a perfect midway point between Spider-Man 1 and 2, because it isn't just a filler game that's what was Miles doing in between these two games. It's a game that really sets up this character to become much more important and much more meaningful when you do jump into Spider-Man 2. And I think that this game really is a game that captures that super well. Overall, Miles Morales is a much more smaller, bite-sized story, but it does a fantastic job at delivering the hard-hitting moments. Whilst they don't reach the same narrative or emotional peaks as Spider-Man's 2018 release, it still does have many hard-hitting moments for this character if you are invested. And I think that it is a great lead-in to the sequel, and it really does make this character feel super impactful. And overall, for the runtime of what this story is, it is a very tight experience and was a great showcase for what the PS5 had in store. In terms of gameplay and on that aspect and front for Miles Morales, it's important to really discuss and get a clear understanding of what this game's angle was for Sony, and that was to showcase the potential of their new and upcoming console of the time, the PS5. So in terms of approaches to gameplay, yes, Miles Morales was an improvement on Marvel's Spider-Man 2018, but it was more an iteration, something that could show off the visual fidelity that the console would offer alongside the SSD, which would present and boast new load times that have been reduced heavily and show lightning speeds. Marvel's Spider-Man was a great game, and Miles Morales was, in every sense of the word to me, from its story being a 1.5 connector to its gameplay, the midway journey, the midway point. And that is something that I want to heavily emphasize in this video. And what I mean by this is, even when you look at many of the different things that have been found in Miles Morales' gameplay, the little flourishes, touch-ups, and iterations, these are things that have been included and do bolster the game, but they're like enhancements and things that make their way into the sequel, or things that were more of a testing ground, feel like they were to see and put a vibe out before going to the next numbered sequel. And I think that it worked in Miles Morales' favor very well, because these features were very welcomed and really great in this game. I think of the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app, which will be a staple for every Spider-Man game going forward. The way that they use this in this game to highlight side activities and the mini collectibles and objectives around is really cool. And then I look at the ways that they've improved and touched up the combat and provided new skills and new ways to approach stealth that Miles had, and the gadgets, and the introduction of Miles' skill set, which are like these lightning based abilities called venom attacks. And I think that they work extremely well, and they really just got the groundwork for this character, which they were obviously going to include in the next game, here in Miles, down pat. So it's really like Miles Morales was a taste test of what's to come, and it really was Insomniac finding their groove before they jumped to the next big thing. And I think it's important to mention that Miles Morales has a ton of interesting little features in it and interesting improvements. It's not anything major where you can go, look, there's that big thing that's a game changer in Miles Morales, but it's things like how they've finessed and improved the overall web slinging in the game, or the combat as well. And they found ways to kind of improve the things like stealth and stuff like this, which I think was neutered in the sequel, but it works really well here in Miles Morales. And I think they've built on and improved many of those foundations from Marvel's Spider-Man that worked really well, and found a way to enhance it and improve it. I think that there's one thing about Miles Morales that kind of stood out to me and weighed heavily on me, especially the second time playing it, and it was those side activities and collectibles that I found in the game. I can keep in mind that this is a midway point between two sequels, two numbered entries, but at the same time, a lot of these activities really did just feel like rehashes in every sense of the word from Marvel's Spider-Man. And I think you had things like landmarks, and then you had, instead of collecting backpacks, it was something else more related to Miles, but they were essentially the same. Spider-Man 2 doesn't do the best job at not feeling like it's Spider-Man 1 in terms of the collectibles, but I think it does a better job than Miles Morales. I overall do think that the biggest thing that Miles Morales has going for it is this midway jump, and its story in particular. Its story is incredibly engaging, and I think for most people playing Spider-Man, your two biggest things probably will be the web swinging and then the story. I think if you're able to swing around Spider-Man, have a good time, the combat is satisfying enough, and that story is going to get you over the line and it's enjoyable, you'll have a good time. And I think that Miles Morales is able to encompass all these things very well within that confines of it being a midway story point. And I think Miles Morales is a game that introduces features that don't really drastically alter or change things, but still do provide a level of improvements. And it's also important to mention that whilst this is a next-gen game that was supposed to showcase all the abilities of the PS5, it was also a game that released on PS4. So it's not like Insomniac could go all out on this one. They would have to reserve that for the sequel. Miles Morales, in terms of combat, feels just as weighty, fun, and flexible with what it offers in terms of abilities, like Venom abilities, and also gadgets. Yeah, Miles has his own gadgets as well, and it's really cool. It really does, similar to what I said in my Spider-Man 2018 video, provide a level of like flexibility to how you can approach different enemies and pull off different combos, and it always is incredibly fun. It's not overly complicated or sophisticated in a crazy way, but it's something that's just engaging and satisfying enough and just really does encapsulate that feeling of making you feel like Spider-Man. It really is a great first outing for the character, and it really does get you in the mindset and the playstyle of how Miles controls, and it makes it that much easier if you've played Miles Morales to jump into the sequel and play as Miles. You'll be immediately familiar with just the type of abilities and moves that he uses and just his playstyle in general. I think that this game was a really good introduction to this character and does a really good job both narratively and gameplay wise at introducing this character's abilities, their stories, and how it's all woven together and how you sequentially get these abilities. If there's one thing that I will say on the front of combat, it's that it does feel like there is a little less variety in terms of enemies in comparison to Spider-Man 2018. But like I said, it does feel like this game is a bit more bite-sized and like a smaller experience compared to Spider-Man 2018. And for some, that might strike them the wrong way given the pricing of this game, especially at launch. But overall, I do think Miles Morales offers a bunch of flexibility, fun combat, and interesting enough encounters throughout the game to keep you satisfied if you are a fan of Spider-Man. So to wrap this video up, I'd like to just put emphasis on the main thing with this video, and that is that Miles Morales is a very good game, and it brings across and carries across all the competencies of Marvel's Spider-Man 2018. So if the video seems like there isn't as much to detail with Miles Morales, that's because a lot of what made Marvel's Spider-Man so great is found and present in the DNA of what makes Miles Morales so great. But what I feel like Miles Morales excels at is being this midway journey between Marvel's Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, and being this connector in terms of ideas, creative testing grounds, and also providing a story that is gripping and really introduces us to the mind narrative of Miles Morales. And I think that that is a great setup with huge payoffs in the sequel. And I think that the way that Miles Morales tells this story and sets up this character is honestly, it is great, because I feel like in Marvel Spider-Man, we got a new Peter Parker, and we didn't need the high school story. We've seen it so many times, and I've talked about this at length. But with Miles Morales, I really do feel like we get a different angle of the journey of Spider-Man, more from a teenage lens, but it tackles those types of hurdles that we would typically find in a Peter Parker story, but through the lens of Miles Morales, and this different angle, backstory, and I really do feel like the way that he grows as a Spider-Man and as a character is a really interesting one, and I really want to discuss how they are building this character arc and how it eventuates in the next game when I eventually cover that game. But here in Miles Morales, it is a great origin story and a great build up for Miles, and the way that they have introduced his character arc and also his abilities, the Venom attacks, it's incredible, and I feel like they've really done a great job at making Miles' playstyle feel very different. I mean, foundationally the same as Peter. I mean, they both web swing and are Spider-Man, but very different, and it can stand out in its own unique way. And I think Miles Morales really does capture a different angle of Spider-Man, and in that way, irregardless of its linearity in where it falls in terms of the story and its structure, Miles Morales is a great standalone story, but ultimately it is a great starting point to get into the story of Miles, and a great story to connect and lead into Spider-Man 2. But this is just my thoughts and feelings on Spider-Man Miles Morales, and definitely I will have a lot more to say about Miles in the second game, because his character plays a huge role in that game, and I feel like this game here sets up for many of the payoffs and feelings that come about in that sequel. Anyways, to close this video out, I'll say this. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales is a game that doubles down on all of the interactive and incredible combat found in Marvel's Spider-Man. It doubles down on the web swinging, providing touch-ups and improvements. It works in some ways to improve the open world elements of the game, where there's a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man app, there is the side quests that do provide some more interesting stories, but ultimately some side objectives and collectibles that feel rehashed. The game overall tells a compelling narrative and story that if you are a fan of Spider-Man and more importantly Miles Morales, this is one that probably will stick with you and really get you highly excited for the sequel. Overall, I think Miles Morales is a good pickup, especially if you enjoyed the first game and one that's worth playing. Thanks for watching, and eventually I will have a video out for Spider-Man 2 detailing my thoughts and feelings and going from there. But thanks for watching this video and have a good one.
Now the whole team celebrating.